The morning mist clung to the cobblestone streets of Florence as Niccolò Machiavelli made his way through the Piazza della Signoria, his leather boots echoing against the ancient stones. It was the year 1513, and the political landscape of Italy resembled a chessboard where every move could mean the difference between power and exile, life and death. Machiavelli, once a trusted secretary to the Florentine Republic, now found himself in forced retirement, his political career seemingly ended by the return of the Medici family to power. Yet it was during these years of supposed decline that Machiavelli would craft his most enduring legacy, not through the wielding of immediate political power, but through the careful cultivation of a reputation that would echo through the centuries. His observations about power, fear, and reputation, meticulously documented in works like The Prince, would become the foundation upon which countless leaders would build their own fearsome reputations. The concept of reputation, as Machiavelli understood it, was not merely about being well regarded or popular. It was about creating such a powerful impression in the minds of others that one's very name could command respect, compliance, and even terror when necessary. This was not the shallow celebrity of his era's court entertainers, but something far more substantial and enduring, a carefully constructed persona that could survive political upheavals, military defeats, and the passage of time itself. As Machiavelli observed the political machinations around him, he noticed that the most successful rulers were not necessarily the most virtuous or the most beloved, but those who had mastered the art of reputation management. They understood that in a world where information traveled slowly and personal encounters were rare, reputation often mattered more than reality. A prince who was rumored to be ruthless might avoid actual conflicts simply because his enemies feared to test him. A leader known for his cunning might find doors opened through negotiation that others could only breach through force. The foundation of a fearsome reputation, Machiavelli realized, rested upon three fundamental pillars: the strategic cultivation of unpredictability, the demonstration of decisive action in moments of crisis, and the careful management of information and narrative. These elements, when skillfully woven together, could create a reputation so formidable that it became a weapon more powerful than armies, a shield more protective than fortifications. Part 1. The Architecture of Fear and Respect. The first pillar of a fearsome reputation lies in understanding the delicate balance between fear and respect. Machiavelli observed that pure terror, while immediately effective, a leader who ruled through fear alone would eventually face rebellion from subjects who had nothing left to lose. Conversely, a leader who sought only to be loved would find their authority constantly challenged by those who felt no consequence for defiance. The key was to forge a reputation that inspired both fear and respect, fear of the consequences of opposition and respect for one's capabilities and judgment. During his diplomatic missions throughout Italy, Machiavelli had witnessed firsthand how Cesare Borgia, the Duke of Valentino, had mastered this balance. Borgia's reputation preceded him wherever he went, not merely as a brutal conqueror, but as a leader whose word was both feared and trusted. When Borgia promised protection to a city that surrendered, that protection was genuinely provided. When he threatened destruction to those who resisted, that destruction inevitably followed. This consistency between promise and action created a reputation for reliability that made negotiations more efficient and conflicts less necessary. The cultivation of such a reputation required what Machiavelli termed calculated unpredictability. This did not mean random or irrational behavior, but rather a strategic inconsistency that kept potential adversaries uncertain about one's next move. A leader might show mercy in one situation while demonstrating severity in another, not based on whim, but on careful calculation of the message each action would send to different audiences. Machiavelli noted that Borgia would sometimes pardon rebels who expected death, creating stories of his magnanimity that would spread throughout his territories. At other times, he would execute those who expected clemency, ensuring that no one would take his mercy for granted. This unpredictability served a dual purpose. It prevented enemies from accurately predicting his responses, making it difficult for them to plan effective opposition, while simultaneously creating multiple narratives about his character that could appeal to different constituencies. The strategic use of intermediaries formed another crucial element in reputation building. Machiavelli observed that the most effective leaders rarely carried out their harshest actions personally, instead delegating such tasks to subordinates who could later be sacrificed if the political winds shifted. This approach allowed a leader to maintain plausible deniability for unpopular decisions while still receiving credit for the results. When Borgia needed to pacify the Romagna region, he appointed Ramiro de Orco as his administrator, giving him carte blanche to use whatever methods were necessary to establish order. Once order was achieved and the harsh measures had served their purpose, Borgia had de Orco executed publicly, simultaneously distancing himself from the administrator's cruelty while demonstrating his own justice and decisive leadership. It allowed for the implementation of necessary but harsh policies without directly staining the leader's reputation for fairness. It provided scapegoats who could be blamed and punished if policies proved unpopular. Most importantly, it demonstrated the leader's awareness of moral boundaries and willingness to enforce accountability, even among their closest associates. The timing of reputation-building actions proved equally crucial. Machiavelli noted that certain moments in a leader's career provided opportunities for reputation-defining actions that would be remembered long after the specific circumstances were forgotten. These moments often came during crises when normal rules were suspended and extraordinary measures were not only accepted but expected. A leader who acted decisively and effectively during such moments could establish a reputation for competence and strength that would serve them well during more peaceful times. The selection of which actions to perform publicly versus privately also required careful consideration. Some demonstrations of power needed to be visible to create the desired impression, while others were more effective when known only through rumor and speculation. A public execution might demonstrate a leader's commitment to justice, but a private meeting where mercy was shown could create equally powerful stories while preserving the possibility of future cooperation with the recipient of that mercy. Machiavelli recognized that the most effective reputation-building strategies were those that appeared to emerge naturally from the leader's character rather than seeming calculated or artificial. The audience needed to believe they were witnessing genuine expressions of the leader's nature, not theatrical performances. This required leaders to develop what might be called authentic performance, the ability to genuinely embody the characteristics they wished their reputation to reflect. This authentic performance extended to the leader's daily interactions and personal habits. Machiavelli observed that the most successful leaders maintained consistent personas across all aspects of their lives, how they conducted themselves in private moments that might become public, and how they responded to unexpected challenges when there was no time for calculated responses. The physical presentation of the leader also played a crucial role in reputation formation. Machiavelli noted that successful leaders paid careful attention to their appearance, their manner of speaking, and their bearing, understanding that these elements communicated messages about their character and capabilities before they spoke a single word. The way a leader entered a room, the tone they used when giving orders, and even their choice of clothing all contributed to the overall impression they created. However, Machiavelli warned against the dangers of overcalculation in reputation management. Audiences had an instinctive ability to detect insincerity, and a leader whose every action seemed obviously calculated for effect would lose the authenticity that made their reputation truly powerful. The key was to develop genuine characteristics that naturally created the desired impression, rather than simply performing those characteristics when convenient. Part 2. The strategic deployment of power and narrative. The second pillar of building a fearsome reputation involved the strategic deployment of power and the careful management of narrative. Machiavelli understood that power was as much about perception as reality, and that the stories told about a leader's actions often mattered more than the actions themselves. This insight led him to develop sophisticated strategies for controlling information flow. The concept of productive ambiguity became central to Machiavelli's thinking about reputation management. Rather than always seeking to clarify their intentions and methods, effective leaders sometimes benefited from allowing uncertainty to persist about their capabilities and plans. This ambiguity could make them appear more powerful than they actually were, as observers filled gaps in their knowledge with assumptions that often inflated the leader's actual strength. Machiavelli observed this principle in action during his study of Francesco Sforza, the Duke of Milan. Sforza had built his reputation partly on his military achievements, but equally on the mysterious efficiency with which he gathered information about his enemies. His intelligence network was whispered about throughout Italy, with wild stories circulating about his ability to learn secrets from impossible distances. While Sforza certainly maintained an effective intelligence operation, he also carefully cultivated the mythology surrounding it, allowing exaggerated stories to spread uncorrected because they enhanced his reputation for omniscience. This productive ambiguity extended to a leader's resources and capabilities by neither confirming nor denying specific claims about their wealth, military strength, or political connections. Leaders could allow their enemies to assume the worst-case scenario from their perspective. An enemy who believed they were facing a leader with vast hidden resources was likely to be more cautious and accommodating than one who knew the exact limitations of their opponent's power. The strategic revelation of information became another crucial tool in reputation management. Rather than keeping all information secret or revealing everything at once, effective leaders parceled out revelations according to a careful timeline designed to maximize their psychological impact. A leader might hint at knowledge of an enemy's secret plans, then reveal specific details at a later time to confirm their intelligence capabilities. This graduated revelation created a sense that the leader knew more than they were saying, encouraging others to assume they were always operating from a position of superior information. Machiavelli noted that the most powerful narratives were those that contained elements of truth but were embellished through retelling. A genuinely impressive action could become legendary through careful management of how it was described and by whom. The key was to ensure that the basic facts were accurate, while allowing the emotional impact to be amplified through storytelling. A military victory could be described in terms that emphasize the leader's personal courage and tactical genius, even if luck and the competence of subordinates had played significant roles. The selection and cultivation of storytellers proved crucial to this process. Machiavelli observed that the most effective reputation-building efforts involved identifying and influencing people who were naturally inclined to tell stories: merchants, travelers, courtiers, and especially those who had reason to be grateful to the leader but were not obviously in their employ. These natural storytellers could spread favorable narratives with a credibility that paid propagandists could never achieve. The concept of reputation by association also played a significant role in Machiavelli's analysis. Leaders could enhance their own reputations by associating themselves with others who already possessed fearsome reputations, while also being careful not to be overshadowed by those associations. This required a delicate balance between demonstrating one's ability to work with powerful allies and maintaining one's independent strength and authority. Machiavelli studied how Lorenzo de' Medici had mastered this technique, forming alliances with powerful figures throughout Italy while always ensuring that he appeared to be an equal partner rather than a subordinate. Lorenzo's reputation benefited from his association with these figures, but his careful management of the relationships ensured that his own reputation remained distinct and powerful. When disagreements arose, Lorenzo was able to maintain his independence without losing the benefit of his previous associations. The management of failure became equally important in reputation building. Machiavelli recognized that no leader could avoid all setbacks, and that the way failures were handled often determined whether they damaged or actually enhanced a leader's reputation. The key was to frame failures in ways that emphasized the leader's character and learning ability, rather than their incompetence or weakness. A military defeat could be presented as the result of betrayal by subordinates, demonstrating the leader's trust and loyalty while explaining the negative outcome. A failed negotiation could be framed as evidence of the leader's unwillingness to compromise their principles for temporary advantage. In each case, the narrative transformed what could have been reputation-damaging events into demonstrations of the leader's positive qualities. Machiavelli also noted the importance of controlling the timing of reputation-building efforts. Certain moments were more favorable for establishing or enhancing one's reputation than others. Periods of general uncertainty or upheaval provided opportunities for leaders to demonstrate their stability and competence, in contrast to the chaos around them. Times of celebration or victory allowed for displays of magnanimity that could enhance a leader's reputation for fairness and generosity. The geographic dimension of reputation management required careful attention as well. Machiavelli observed that leaders needed to understand how their reputations might be perceived differently in different locations and among different audiences. A reputation for religious devotion might enhance a leader's standing in some regions while being seen as weakness in others. The key was to develop multiple facets of one's reputation that could be emphasized or de-emphasized depending on the audience and context. The role of symbols and ceremonial displays in reputation building could not be overlooked. Machiavelli noted that humans had a natural tendency to attach meaning to visual and ceremonial elements, and that effective leaders used this tendency to reinforce their desired reputation. The choice of symbols, the design of ceremonies, and even the architectural settings where important meetings took place all contributed to the overall impression a leader created. However, Machiavelli warned against over-reliance on symbolic displays at the expense of substantive achievements. While ceremony and symbolism could enhance a reputation built on real accomplishments, they could not substitute for genuine capability and effectiveness. The most sustainable reputations were those that combined impressive symbolic presentations with actual results. Part 3. The maintenance and legacy of formidable influence, the third and perhaps most challenging pillar of building a fearsome reputation, involved its maintenance and transformation into lasting legacy. Machiavelli understood that creating a powerful reputation was only the beginning. The greater challenge lay in sustaining and evolving that reputation over time while adapting to changing circumstances and new challenges. The concept of reputation durability became central to Machiavelli's analysis of long-term political success. He observed that reputations built solely on immediate circumstances or temporary advantages inevitably declined as those circumstances changed. The most enduring reputations were those that transcended specific achievements to become part of a leader's fundamental identity in the minds of observers. This transformation required what Machiavelli termed reputation institutionalization, the process by which a leader's personal characteristics and methods became embedded in the structures and cultures they created. Rather than being dependent on the leader's continued presence and active management, these institutionalized reputations continued to influence behavior and expectations even after the leader was no longer actively involved in day-to-day affairs. Julius Caesar provided Machiavelli with a compelling example of reputation institutionalization. Caesar's reputation for decisive action and military genius had become so thoroughly embedded in Roman culture that his successors could invoke his name and methods to legitimize their own actions centuries after his death. The phrase, "crossing the Rubicon," became a permanent part of political vocabulary, representing the willingness to take irreversible action in pursuit of one's goals. This institutionalization meant that Caesar's reputation continued to influence political calculations long after his physical death. The process of institutionalization required leaders to move beyond personal charisma and temporary achievements to create lasting changes in how others thought about power, leadership, and success. This often involved establishing new precedents, creating new institutions, or fundamentally altering existing power structures in ways that reflected the leader's approach and values. Machiavelli noted that the most successful leaders understood the importance of training and developing successors who could carry forward their methods and reputation. This succession planning went beyond simply choosing capable subordinates. It required creating systems and cultures that would naturally produce leaders who embodied similar characteristics and approaches. The reputation thus became self-perpetuating, with new generations of leaders emerging from structures that had been shaped by the original leader's vision and methods. The challenge of reputation evolution presented another crucial consideration. As circumstances changed and new challenges emerged, leaders needed to adapt their reputations without losing their essential character or credibility. This required a careful balance between consistency and flexibility, maintaining the core elements that made their reputation powerful while demonstrating the ability to learn and grow in response to new situations. Machiavelli observed this challenge in the later career of Pope Julius II, whose reputation for military prowess and political cunning had served him well during his rise to power. As the political situation in Italy changed and military solutions became less viable, Julius successfully evolved his reputation to emphasize his role as a patron of the arts and a builder of lasting institutions. His support for artists like Michelangelo and his architectural projects created a new dimension to his reputation that complemented rather than contradicted his earlier image as a warrior pope. The management of generational transition became crucial for reputation durability. Machiavelli noted that reputations often faced their greatest test when they encountered new generations who had not directly witnessed the actions that originally established them. These new audiences might be skeptical of stories they had only heard secondhand, or they might interpret past actions through the lens of contemporary values that differed from those of earlier periods. Successful reputation maintenance therefore required ongoing efforts to make the reputation relevant to new audiences and new circumstances. This might involve reframing historical achievements in contemporary terms, demonstrating how past principles applied to current challenges, or finding new ways to display the characteristics that had originally established the reputation. The role of documentation and record-keeping in reputation maintenance could not be overlooked. Machiavelli himself became a master of this aspect of reputation building through his writings, which ensured that his observations and methods would outlive his own lifetime. Leaders who wanted their reputations to endure needed to think carefully about how their actions and principles would be recorded and remembered. This documentation process required more than simply keeping accurate records. It involved shaping the narrative framework within which future audiences would understand past actions. The way events were described, the context that was provided, and the lessons that were drawn all influenced how future generations would interpret and value a leader's reputation. Machiavelli also recognized the importance of reputation flexibility in response to external attacks and criticism. No reputation, no matter how carefully constructed, would go unchallenged by enemies and rivals. The key was to develop robust defenses against reputation attacks while maintaining the ability to acknowledge genuine mistakes and adapt when necessary. The most effective defense against reputation attacks often involved having multiple sources of credibility and multiple dimensions to one's reputation. A leader whose reputation rested solely on military prowess might be vulnerable to attacks that questioned their intelligence or moral character. However, a leader who had demonstrated competence across multiple domains could better weather attacks against any single aspect of their reputation. The concept of reputation legacy extended beyond the leader's own lifetime to encompass their influence on future generations of leaders and the lasting impact of their methods and principles. Machiavelli understood that the most fearsome reputations were those that continued to influence behavior and expectations long after their originators had departed from the scene. This legacy aspect of reputation building required leaders to think beyond their immediate goals and consider how their actions and methods would be remembered and applied by others. It involved creating not just personal success, but lasting changes in how leadership was understood and practiced within their spheres of influence. The maintenance of a fearsome reputation ultimately required a sophisticated understanding of human psychology and social dynamics. Leaders needed to recognize that reputations existed primarily in the minds of others, and that maintaining those mental impressions required ongoing attention and occasional dramatic reinforcement. A reputation that was taken for granted would gradually lose its power, while one that was periodically demonstrated through decisive action could maintain its influence across decades. Machiavelli's final insight concerned the paradox of reputation success. The most effective fearsome reputations were often those that made their actual use unnecessary. A leader whose reputation for decisive action was so well established that opponents chose accommodation over confrontation had achieved the ultimate goal of reputation building. The fear and respect they inspired prevented the conflicts that might otherwise have been necessary to maintain their position. This paradox highlighted the sophisticated nature of Machiavellian reputation building. It was not about creating conflict or demonstrating power for its own sake, but about establishing such a compelling presence in the minds of others that they naturally acted in ways that supported the leader's goals. The fearsome reputation became a form of soft power that achieved through psychological influence what might otherwise have required force or coercion. As Machiavelli reflected on these principles during his years of forced retirement, he understood that he was not merely analyzing political tactics, but describing fundamental aspects of human nature and social organization. The leaders who mastered these principles were not simply more successful in achieving their immediate goals, they were participating in the eternal human struggle to create order and meaning in a chaotic world. The lessons he documented would outlive the specific political circumstances that inspired them, providing a framework for understanding power and reputation that would remain relevant as long as humans organized themselves into social and political structures. His own reputation, built through careful observation and brilliant analysis rather than military conquest or political office, would demonstrate the enduring power of ideas in shaping how future generations understood the relationship between power. Through his systematic study of reputation building, Machiavelli had revealed that the most fearsome reputations were not accidents of personality or circumstance, but the products of careful strategy, consistent execution, and deep understanding of human psychology. The princes and leaders who commanded fear and respect had earned those responses through deliberate actions designed to create specific impressions in the minds of their audiences. The sophistication of this approach to reputation building revealed why Machiavelli's insights remained relevant across centuries and cultures. He had identified not just tactical approaches to political success, but fundamental principles governing how humans respond to displays of power. These principles operated whether the leader in question was a Renaissance prince seeking to unify Italian city-states, or a modern executive attempting to establish authority within a corporate hierarchy. The fearsome reputation, as Machiavelli understood it, represented the successful synthesis of capability and perception, of substance and presentation, of immediate tactical success and long-term strategic vision. It required leaders to master not only the practical aspects of their roles, but also the psychological and social dimensions that determined how their actions would be interpreted and remembered by others. In the end, Machiavelli's analysis revealed that the construction of a fearsome reputation was itself an art form, one that required intelligence, creativity, and deep understanding of human nature. The leaders who mastered this art did not merely achieve their immediate political goals, they shaped the very definitions of power and leadership for generations that followed them. Their fearsome reputations became part of the cultural inheritance of their societies, influencing how future leaders understood their roles and how followers understood what they could expect from those who claimed authority over them.